Welcome back to ValorC3 Tech Bytes. I'm Alan Politsky, Solutions Engineer at ValorC3, and today we're going to dive into the networks and security portion of Private Cloud Director. There's a lot of cool built-in features within the networks and security portion of the product. This is where you're primarily going to control and manage your Geneva networking, especially subnets or whatnot that you build in here that are going to be tied to your virtual routers or possibly your virtual firewall. But also there's some other cool features like the built-in load balancer as a service product within the application. So kind of just to dive straight into it, I'm going to go ahead and click into my networks here. And I'm going to go ahead and show you just how easy it is to create a new subnet within the product. So up top here, if we hit the plus sign, create network, we're going to go up here and just name it whatever we want to name it for this scenario. I'll just go ahead and call it AMPD just to be consistent with what we've been doing. We'll just call it test. We're going to go ahead and create a description for that. This is a good way to identify whatever you've created the specific network for. Test network for demo. Admin state is going to be up. And then we're going to go ahead and create a subnet here. So the nice part about Geneva networking within the product is it allows for us to have access to all these subnets, regardless if you have, say, another tenant that may have an overlapping subnet. This is all isolated to that specific tenant that you're operating out of. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and just use the same name for the subnet down here. And then I'm going to go ahead and use IPv4 just because that's what I'm comfortable with using in here. And then what I'm going to do is just create a generic subnet in here, 192.168. We'll do 200.0/24, and that's going to give me a CIDR here for that specific subnet. It's going to give me all those IPs on that .200 network. I can now go ahead and set my gateway up IP here, 192.168.200, and I'm just going to use a .1. You do have the option to disable the gateway if you want to. You also have the ability to enable DHCP here. And with that being enabled, you have the ability to go down here and add an allocation pool. That's going to let me put a range in right now for that specific subnet. So we'll just do 11 through, let's do 11 through 20. And that's going to give me that allocation pool. If I want to add a name server, like say I had one internal that I wanted to point to, I could do that here. I'm just going to go ahead and point these to Google and Cloudflare for this specific scenario. And then I'm going to go ahead and create this network here. And what you'll see here is I actually have a network now added to, or that subnet is now added to my list of networks up here for me to be able to use with a VM. It's not shared to any tenants. Some of them will be shared depending on if you're using like a physical VLAN. That's going to be set up and configured by the ValorC3 team. That might come into play if you have, say a cross connect to a colo cabinet where you're talking back to a physical firewall that's in a space, a colo space somewhere, and you need to route back through that. Or alternatively, you may just have a VLAN out through us somewhere for any other purpose, whether that be Megaport or some other service that you utilize with ValorC3. But for this specific scenario, I'm just going to go ahead and use this test network to build a virtual router with. So if I go down here into my virtual routers, you can see I have a couple of them configured already, and just to dive in, into the one that's working on the existing demo VM that I have now. You can see here I have my interfaces configured for that virtual router. So the one that the Web01 and Web02 VMs from the last videos we're talking out of are going to be this specific virtual router. And you'll see here the external network for that is going to be that Valor public IP pool. That's where I was talking about if we had a physical VLAN set up for you. If you created a new virtual router that needed to go back out to, say, a cabinet or something like that to talk to a firewall, you'd set up the virtual router. Your external network would be the VLAN assigned by ValorC3. But then within Private Cloud Director, you'd be able to build subnets and tie those subnets as interfaces to that virtual router. So in here, like I was showing you before, we're just using the public IP pool on this one, but within there, I have my Kubernetes network. I have my St. George network in here, my digital network, and my AMPD, which is, I believe, just the original one that I set up. I don't think I have anything on it right now. But with that being said, this router now uses security groups in here, which are going to be tied to a variety of inbound and outbound rules. By default, one gets created in here for access in and access out. You'll see here just for the testing purposes, I've opened all inbound and outbound traffic on IPv4 and IPv6. This just allows that firewall or that virtual router to communicate in and out without any sort of restrictions. But this is just kind of like port forwarding rules you would have in your standard router at home, where you could just go and you could port forward specific ports to a specific IP or security group within that networking. But for the sake of the demo, I'm just going to leave it at any, essentially an any rule within the networking. So now let's go ahead and build a new virtual router in here to tie to that network. For this demo, I'm just going to go ahead and use the public IP pool again. So I'll go in here and create a new router. We're going to just call this MPD demo. Admin state up external network. We're going to go ahead and hit that Valor public IP pool again. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add that subnet that we just created in here. So you can see we got our 200 subnet in there. If we wanted to, we could add another subnet. For this specific scenario, I'm just going to go ahead and add that one. If we needed to designate a port, we could designate a port. I don't have any pre-created in here, but this could be where you get into specific ports to route traffic between networks. For this scenario, we're just going to do the full subnet. So with that being said, let me clean up my name up here. We're going to go ahead and create that virtual router in here. And then what that's going to do is going to allow me to build VMs on this network, and it's going to allow outbound access through the Valor public IP pool to get to the internet. So say I go back to one of my virtual machines in here, my Web 01. I've got, obviously a couple of networks in here tied to that one virtual router. Let's say I want to go ahead and add another network in here. I know we've added a million networks to this one, but who cares, right? We'll go ahead and add a new network interface. We're going to add AMPD test, which is going to be on our new virtual router. And let's see if it picks up an IP here in a second on Web 01. All right, so now if I do a refresh down here, you'll see I do have a new interface down here. It's picked up an IP on that virtual machine. Theoretically, this should be able to hit the internet as well. So if we want to go check that, we can just log right into that Web 01 virtual machine. We'll give it a second here. Link up. We'll type in our password. And now what we should see is 3 active interfaces. Yep, it sees my network already. I'm going to go ahead and hit yes. And then what we'll do in here is we'll just dive into network and internet settings. Change adapter options. And here in a second, we'll see all 3 of our networks connected to the internet. So pretty straightforward. Adding a new network is pretty easy, especially if you're utilizing that virtual router. It can get a little bit more complex, but if you think about the virtual router from a perspective of it just being a dumbed down firewall for the most part, you could theoretically, create a virtual firewall within the product, whether that be OpenSense or maybe you're using Fortinet or Palo. And the concept is the same thing. That being said, you're going to build those interfaces onto the virtual firewall instead of out of the networks and security portion. So kind of like I did with my virtual machine, I'd be adding an interface for, whether I had a physical VLAN that Valor had assigned to me, or I'm just utilizing the public IP space and then some interfaces that I've created within the networking. That's theoretically how you could create those layer 2, layer 3 networks within the product and assign them to a virtual firewall as well. With that being said, we can go back to security groups. You'll see here my K8 clusters, they have more specified rules when it comes to the inbound and outbound rules. These are going to be, obviously port ranges or specific ports and protocols in here for things. These get auto-built when you create a Kubernetes cluster within the product, but it just goes to show how refined you can make these port policies just by using the virtual router. So, it can accommodate things like HTTP, HTTPS connections. Obviously, we always are going to recommend that you use a firewall for the purposes of controlling security and access and whatnot. But for basic access, the product itself has a lot of cool built-in features that allow for you to actually just spin up a VM and get out to the internet, especially if you don't have anything that needs to come in inbound. Another cool feature, which we really haven't talked about, is the load balancer as a service. I played with this a few times, but this is just an overlay product built into private cloud director. So when you provision the load balancer in here, it's just a straight up service. There doesn't add any additional overhead compute. It's not going to go against your quota. What it allows for you to do is create port listeners for specific pool members. So say if you're trying to load balance connections to a web server, you can do that through essentially the load balancer as a service product built directly into private cloud director. To demonstrate this, I'll go ahead and utilize the button up here to add a load balancer. And we'll just go ahead and call this web access because we're just going to use our 2 web VMs. And actually, you know what we should do is just check and see which network we want to do this on. So both of these virtual machines are on that AMP Digital 108 subnet. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and launch load balancer. We're going to use that 108 subnet. Create a load balancer. We'll call it web access. And I haven't opened these up for anything more than, I believe, HTTP. We'll just double check. I think I got an inbound rule for HTTP in here. Yeah, HTTP. Right there, HTTPS, HTTP. So then what we'll do is we'll go back to the load balancer. We're going to use our subnet. We're just going to call it AMP Digital, which is that 108 network assigned to both of those VMs. We're going to go ahead and create that load balancer. So I know right now, because I have set both of these up and they're running HTTP on IIS with a web page, we'll be able to see here. Right, go to my sites, default website. They're set up to browse on HTTP. So I know both of those have port 80 open within each one of those VMs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a listener here. We're going to call this web access, and I'll just do listen. And we're going to use our load balancer we just created, and we're going to use the protocol TCP on port 80, just because that's the port that we specified in IIS for HTTP. I'll create the listener now. So now we have a listener tied to that load balancer, right? And then what we need to do is create a pool. So that pool is going to be web access pool. The listener now is going to be assigned listen. Protocol TCP. We're going to use just the standard source IP port because that's what's available to us right now with the OVN provider. And then what we'll do is we'll create that pool. And then now what I can do is I can add members to that specified pool. So we'll call the pool member 1 web01. We're going to put it in web access pool. The subnet is going to be on AMPD Digital. I forgot my web IP address, so I'm going to go back into the product here. We'll just duplicate my tab. And then we'll go grab the IPs of those virtual machines. So we have 108.104, 108.150. So web01 is 108.104. So 192.168.108.104 and port 80. And what it's going to do is it's going to actually, add our virtual router there. I'm going to specify the port that I want it to look on. It's checking for provisioning for load balancing here. It'll give us in a second here. It'll let us know if it's able to hit port 80 on that VM. We'll go ahead and add the other member, which is going to be web02. In our pool for web access, our subnet's going to be AMP Digital. The router is going to be pre-selected because that's basically the same subnet. 192.168.108.150, and this is going to be on port 80 as well. We'll add that member, and here in a second you'll see now I do have 2 VMs in here listed as a part of that web access pool. That web access pool is a part of that web access listener, which is looking on port 80, and here's our load balancer with our virtual IP address. So theoretically, if I were to go into one of those virtual machines and hit that virtual IP address, it should just be round robining me into one of the web servers, and obviously hiding the back end address. We'll check the monitor here. We'll add a health monitor for those VMs. We'll just check TCP, pool, web access pool, and we're going to go ahead and just add this health monitor in here, and it's going to let us know if it's going to have any issues with those members. So basically this is going to check against those members within that pool repeatedly, essentially every 30 seconds or so. if it fails 3 times, it'll create an error in here. The timeout is 10 seconds. So, if it doesn't get a response in 10 seconds, it considers it's a failure. It'll try 3 more times before it presents us with an error. We can obviously adjust those to either shorten or lengthen those metrics to determine whether or not, we wanted to, more quickly determine that there's an active failure. So there's some granularity there. But as we go back here, you'll see it can see those 2 virtual machines. It lists them as online. So just to test this, let's grab this IP, which is 192.168.108.174. We'll just try to hit it within the VM. And just to demonstrate the purposes of the load balancer. All right, so now if we go to HTTPS / 192.168.108.174, oops, HTTP, actually I should do it this way. I have my number lock key on, that's part of the problem, 192.168.108.174, and we'll just do port 80, test. Boom, we hit our IIS page. So that has cycled essentially my connection to one of those web servers in a round robin fashion, utilizing that load balancer as a service within the product. So all this stuff is built into Private Cloud Director. So a very, very cool feature. Still utilizes the virtual router, the networks you create in here. If you've assigned public IPs, obviously those public IPs are going to probably be dedicated external networks on that virtual router, but there's just a lot of capability directly out of the box within the product that allows for you just to do a lot of things. With that being said, this is pretty much going to be where I want to cut this one off, just because we can get into a little bit more in detail or get a little more in depth as soon as we start throwing virtual firewalls into the mix or Kubernetes into the mix. But again, I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, be sure to ask them in the chat. And we look forward to you joining us on future videos. Thanks again.